while I was teaching, the then government architect in Montserrat had actually reached out to the school that they were looking to fill a position, and they really wanted to fill it with somebody from the region who, understood what it was like to build in the Caribbean, what it was like to design for the Caribbean. And so they had a number of persons who had filled the position that were from the UK, that were there on sort of temporary contractual basis, but they always knew that it was meant to be temporary, and they wanted to really try and have somebody that was from the region, that could also lend that influence as well. So I was given the task to find, recent graduates who would be interested in taking up that post. And so, would pick up the phone and call people, send emails to people who I knew that were working or weren't working, and, sort of submitted their names and said, hey, these people are going to contact you, and they were going to make all these interviews. And whilst I was doing it, they just kind of politely said, so why aren't you applying? And I had no answer to give them. And I said, well, I'm teaching, I've kind of taken on this thing to teach part-time, and I'm doing other things. I'm working with, one of these local architects part-time. So I'm trying to find my feet, since completing my master's. And they're like, how about we fly you down and you can take a look at the place? We'll have a chat and you see if this is something that you're interested in. The Christmas break came, I flew down for a couple of days, went through Antigua, overnight there, met with a friend of mine from undergraduate, and she's like, Montserrat, really? I never thought you would do that. And I'm like, I don't know, I'm just going to take a look. And I don't know, I got that penny tour. They gave, I think, one of the technical staff from the office drove me around, picked me up from the port, because the way to get to the island at those days, and I still think very much, was that you flew into Antigua and then you had to take a ferry to Montserrat, which is, no bother to me. It was definitely a nice introduction to come, going to anywhere by water, and sort of seeing, you're just looking at sea and then just seeing this island kind of just emerging in front of you. And, it was, I think, with a little bit of trepidation, because, that there would have been this volcano that erupted. At the time it was, it's about 6-7 years earlier. And, kind of wondering, how are they managing? How are they subsisting? And seeing.
What year was this?
I went for the interview I left 2001. No, 2002.
Mm-hmm. Because you said you were teaching during
right. So 2002, mm-hmm. And so went in and you realize that that Caribbean spirit is just absolutely alive. And even though they had gone through this adversity, they were still alive and happy. People were there with their families. Even though there had been this mass migration of many of the residents, those that had relocated to the north of the island were, kind of making it their own. There was such a natural beauty to this island and a familiarity to it. It reminded, there were sections that we were driving and I thought, oh, I'm in Stone Hill. Oh, wait, no, I am in Bogwalk. Wait, no, I am in St. Elizabeth, and it was like that. There's such a shared history between Jamaica and Montserrat that I think many of us don't know, and it was just getting a small taste of it. And I love the outdoors, and I think it kind of awoken that sort of spirit. And I was like, I think this is a really beautiful place. And then when I went for what I thought was supposed to be an interview, was really just this kind of conversation about me and life and everything. And it kind of ended with like, oh, okay, well, I have to go to a meeting. We're going to send you an offer. But, you enjoy the rest of your trip here. And, and I continued just doing a little bit of, touring and stuff, mm-hmm. Around the island, and just sort of seeing a lot of the natural beauty, and also seeing some of the work that they had started doing, and kind of an expectation of what they were looking to do. I think I was back on the plane. By the time I got back to Jamaica, there was an offer sent to me via email, and I just kind of made that that adult decision, and I, just kind of had to politely say, to my job that I was on part-time that I wouldn't be returning for the second semester. So my first foray in teaching was one semester and it was out. And then I went to Montserrat. And I went in as I think it was the deputy government architect. And within 18 months, I took over as the government architect.
Let's take a break here. People. Were you 25 yet?
I don't think so.
People. Okay, first of all, there are a few lessons here, okay, especially for the young people. Take that opportunity. Okay, don't be afraid. Trust yourself. David is going to tell us about how he grew up professionally and as a man, right, in this time. But a lot of the times you just have to take that step. Okay, it's hard.
Yeah.
You take that plane and take that ferry and do what you have to do, okay? And the second thing is, again, in the Caribbean, which is a very small region, still in the Eastern Caribbean, okay, there are a lot of professional needs. So when you're trained at your master's level, you're trained at your PhD level, you're trained overseas, you're trained locally. There are still in many professions, medical professions, technical professions that need people. David was a government architect, okay, at younger than 25. So I guess I'm preaching, but my thing is just think about your region, think about where there's a need and how you can serve because it's needed. Yeah. Okay, back to you.
All right.
So tell us more about that time. Tell us about what you did. Tell us what it was like.
So the interesting thing is that they were going in towards their second phase of kind of redevelopment of sorts. So there was a lot of temporary buildings that they had done because there was this migration to the north of the island, as well as persons leaving. And so a lot of the general infrastructure that had happened was really meant to be temporary. And so within the second phase, we were, making that transition from things that were going to be temporary to more permanent. Whether they would have been the final one or not was neither here nor there, but it was a lot about trying to put in a lot of new infrastructure. So when I got there, there was a big emphasis both on health and education, which professionally, I'm still quite interested in. So I think during those initial times, we were, doing a lot of conceptual stuff for expansion of the hospital, which included an operating theater, a mortuary, there was a women's wing, sort of maternity ward, development of a minor operating theater that could also serve, both internal and external needs. We were doing a lot of health centers, so that were meant to be a sort of primary healthcare facilities. That kind of adjoined with that. We did a lot of schools. Very first project I worked on while I was there that also got built was this renovation of an old residence, an old stone residence, to expand it to become a nursery, an early education facility for, about 60 students. And that was really kind of that sort of touching thing, and had a lot of projects that were like that. There was things like we did a volcano observatory, and it was where the technical staff could actually monitor the volcano 24 hours a day, because it was still very much active.
May I interrupt?
Sure.
So can you tell us about the volcano and also remind us about the population of Montserrat, sort of before and after the major volcanic eruption?
I think before the volcano, and I think any knowledge of Montserrat before that I had was really these mentions of overseas territories, that you would try and remember during geography class. You'd remember, and you'd try and remember them alphabetically, so they'd be like Anguilla, they'd be Cayman, then was, Bahamas, Cayman, and then you'd go blank, and then you remember, Montserrat, and so their population prior to the volcano, I think they'd said it was around 15,000, and they had I think the visitors that came in, they had a lot of permanent tourists that was about another 30,000 that would come. So, on any any point in time, they may have like 20,000 people on the island.
People, is that a quarter? How many people are in Portmore, Jamaica?
Way more. Way more.
That's not, I don't think that's 10% of Portmore's population.
Yeah, not even. After Volcano, they were really struggling to maintain 5,000 people. But, which is 5,000 people is a very large high school in Jamaica. Just that simple, and, the joke usually is that, oh, you must know everyone, or that everyone knows you. And less about that, but rather that everybody's a familiar face, that you can strike up a conversation with anyone. And there is such this indelible, warm spirit of Montserratians, much like Jamaicans, as any West Indians, that, they're willing, they're willing to sort of open their doors and have a conversation, and a real endeared and truthful conversation, whether you like it or not, but there was a sense of sincerity that I, took a little while to kind of get through, because, there were some idioms that were a little bit different, that, you kind of grow in Jamaica, and, those are not things that people say to you. You want to take offense, and you realize.
Do you have an example? Can you
No,
remember any?
none for this polite country. Do not do that.
Okay.
But I think there's, that was one of those parts that stood out to us, and I think I really enjoyed while I was there.
And so you renewed your contract multiple times.
Yeah, my contract was intended to be 2 years, and I think the first 2 years, I want to say that first 6 months was difficult, because you don't know what to pack for, and so had suitcases of stuff that I, came down with. And I think for like 6 months, most of those things just sat in a suitcase. And so I think I came, I don't know, I must have arrived in March. And I think by the end of March, I had already taken 2 trips back to Jamaica. And it was, I needed this, I don't need this, and there was a little bit of back and forth, and, almost a point of like, people like, are you here or there? And, I would say jokes like, oh, I want to work in Montserrat, I live in Jamaica, type of scenario, sort of tongue in cheek. But I think there was just a little bit of adjustment about what are the things that you need to survive and live the way that you're living. And I think
what did you really need?
Yeah,
I'm asking you.
There were lots of things. I found that I needed my books. Like there were things that, there were books that I hadn't finished reading that I wanted to. These were architectural publications that I found were, inspirational. Things that I were taken for granted before, having a conversation with other architects or other people within the field, that there were now a limited number of them that may not necessarily have those same interests. So I found that I dove into my reading and also writing about the profession, and just my own sort of general research. I found that I needed, it's going to sound weird, when I got there, I couldn't get white rum. This is not a plug for white rum, but things we think about.
It is a white rum.
Absolutely. This now, but at the time I never really drank the stuff, but it was, parents always said, you need to keep a bottle of that around just in case. And I found there was just also, I think, a lot of clothes that I thought I would need. I just really didn't, and so I just kind of took them back. And when I took them back, many of them I just gave to charity. I gave to people who were more needing of it. And just kind of focused on the things that I had, and which were, my needs are generally simple, things that I was interested in, things that I wanted to kind of grow and develop. Those were the things that I kind of needed. I had friends that were also, they were going on with their lives. And so, it was also an opportunity just to kind of like make peace with that, but also kind of say to them like, look, if you're traveling around here, I have a space, it's my own, come if you want to visit. And yeah, I had quite a number of visitors while I was there. Many of them were like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? But many of them understood in a very short space of time. They kind of understood like, yeah, this is part of this is your calling for right now. You're following that lead. You're giving as much of yourself as you can, and learning as much about the profession and about myself as is possible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, what do you say were the top 3 things that you learned in that time in Montserrat?
Wow.
Architecturally, life, everything.
I think professionally, I learned how to put a building together, and I think I kind of learned a bit of mastering of my craft, in terms of, it was definitely a time when I built the most. A lot of the work that we designed was built, for better or for worse, and I became extremely sort of critical of the things that we're doing. I think the other thing was, realizing these things about, yes, we're Caribbean islands, but, and as much as we think of Montserrat as being isolated, I'd never been so close to the Eastern Caribbean in my life. And so there was this, I could feel lonely on a Friday. I could be on the ferry and I could be in Trinidad by 8 p.m., for drinks. I could have a friend in St. Lucia who said, boy, partner, a long time I don't see you want to show up for dinner. And I'd be on my way.
That's vibes. I love that.
I can tell you for certain, anytime I saved money, it quickly disappeared in traveling. And so, yeah, I saw a lot of the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean. I think at the time there were definitely more flights available because we had, there were a lot of sort of Virgin Airlines. Wood Stewart at the time had, attempts with Caribbean Star and Caribbean Sun in the Eastern Caribbean. And so there was a lot of that. And so I would say, definitely learn how to put buildings together. Definitely about travel and that sort of, realizing that even though we're islands, we're still connected, and sort of enforcing and reinforcing those things, and, keeping the connections of my, my friends and former classmates, that were in the Eastern Caribbean, and making that sort of linkage. And I think the last one is that, would probably be that even when things are difficult, they're not the end, they are just a lesson. And I think there was the biggest lesson for me with Montserrat was that here were people who had gone through perhaps the most difficult thing in their lives. It wasn't a person who lost their homes. You're talking, scores of people who lost their home, that lost their land. The volcano changed the landscape physically as well as psychologically. People can't even look and see where their houses were. That land doesn't exist anymore. The contours of it has changed. Roads are gone. Houses have just been completely, destroyed. And in some cases, in an instant, in other cases, very slow and drawn out. But their spirit and, what makes them Montserratian has not. The volcano doesn't define them. It is just this part way. They have a history that is extremely colorful. It's, perhaps one of the only other countries in the Caribbean that has a musical history, that we can really speak about. They had the famed Air Studios where Dire Straits, Rolling Stones, all of these guys used to record at. And who also owned houses on the island. So they have that kind of history that predates the volcano. And, even though the volcano may have interrupted that, they're still very much, they've been vibrant members of the Caribbean community.
Yeah.
They've, through sort of past chief ministers and now premiers, they've been, important writers about how the Caribbean can and can't be run. Even as an overseas territory, a British overseas territory, they've still been very, very active. They had one of their youth ministers actually presented at Lord's last year. And the very interesting thing, and it's a strange plug, is that she's actually of Jamaican parentage. Was actually one of the consultants that came down from Jamaica that relocated to Montserrat. It's, his youngest daughter who was actually presented as youth minister in Lord's. And I thought, things of that nature, I think speaks a lot about Montserrat.
And Jamaica.
not just that it's not just Jamaica, but I think the fact that in the kind of, and I don't want to use the word rebirth because they didn't go anywhere, but I think in part of them, redeveloping and finding their new foothold and their sort of growth is that there's been, yes, there's Montserrat, but that sort of Caribbean connection has grown. While I was there were a fair number of Jamaican, Guyanese, Trinidadians, Bajans who had found themselves professionally in Montserrat, and many of them just never really found a reason to leave. Like they were in tune with what was happening. They saw the vision and they wanted to see it through. And I think that really being able to that level of service, which I had mentioned earlier, which, during my time in high school, values that I had been raised around, while I was in Montserrat, that this notion of service became, I think it kind of like threw it in the front of my face, that this is kind of how it is that you want to practice. That it's not about, it's not about wealth and glory. It's about using your talents for the betters of others, and it's that paying forward that you can do in ways that you really, can't expect, and it's we forget sometimes that, as architects, it's not about limited to those that can afford it. The principal thing and something that we talk about as a practice is that we believe that architecture is for all. That's a very important topic. Architecture is for all. It means that everyone, no matter what station in life they are, deserves good architecture. Whether it be a park, the right home, an office that is comfortable, they all deserve good architecture.
Facts, big facts.
And the way that we do it in different parts of the world are different. For us in the tropics, for us in the Caribbean, it has to be something that is reflective of our physical environment, but also our cultural environment. And I think, Montserrat for me was about that. That was my masterclass. It was a long time, that I spent there, but it was, it was a daily lesson. And it was a lesson that was not just applied while I was in Montserrat, but I was able to work on projects that were in other parts of the region. And it was about exercising those very same values. And it was those values that I took back to Jamaica.
All right. So speaking of coming back to Jamaica now, before you left Montserrat, you kind of took a hit.
Yes.
Because you were pretty much preparing to stay. You bought a house.
Yeah.
You did the thing. You did the grown-up thing. And then the people were like, we're not renewing the contract. Tell me what that was like. And then tell me, like, what the transition was back to Jamaica at that point.
Yeah. So at the time, I mean, and again, it's important to be, very conscious about the way that I was raised, is that, the closer and closer you get to the apex of, any task that you're doing, once you've reached there, the first thing that you're supposed to do is to think about your successor. And I think by the time I'd become government architect, the very first thing I had done was to interview for a successor. And I was actually able to, and oddly enough, went on interviews around the region, and oddly, as it turns out, the person that I had as my successor was a Jamaican, who came in and filled the post. And so, it also allowed us to do more work, but for whatever reason, I think I had sort of made this transition, and I had now become seconded to another department. So I was able to allow my successor to retain in an architect position, and I went in as the deputy project manager for the development of the new town. And this new town was meant to be the capital of Montserrat, which is Little Bay. And it needed a lot of work and about what was doing about conceptually. And it required, I think, a vast knowledge and interest in other things. They had contracted a project manager who had wealth of experience, throughout the world, doing similar work in Asia Minor, throughout Europe, in the Americas, as well as the Caribbean. And it was, I kind of was his understudy to really kind of bring in things as much as possible. And we spent about a year and a half in it, but it was a very, very difficult transition. And they kind of went to a point and they were restructuring that entire, rethinking about how they were approaching the capital, because they really were looking for a lot of private investment that they just weren't getting, for many reasons. One of it being an overseas territory and the agreements that they had for rebuilding. Everything has their own stipulation. And so they kind of put a pause on that. And the intention was that since I was seconded, that I would return to my post. But when I returned to the post, I was actually at the end of my contract. And I think they just said, we think that we may want to just continue with the structure that we had. And that was kind of a blow, to me, because I was really thinking that, I need to stop thinking of Montserrat as being somewhere temporary, and really sort of prepare for a bit of permanence, which was, I think, the dialectic of my parents. My father saying, well, you have to be prepared, and always have that level of preparation and sort of this sort of finality. My mother more like, saying, go with where the energy is, and so I, reluctantly bought, a house, and it was really meant to be a fixer-upper, sort of within the length of what I could afford. And so, unfortunately, I now had no job, and I had this house, and I had to, I had the full cycle of growing up, the cycle of taking a mortgage, but also the cycle of now actually to take a compulsory foreclosure. And that was very, very difficult because in your head, you think that you're a failure. And it was not in any way a failure. I think, it's, again, all of these things are lessons learned. And so did that, returned to Jamaica, kind of hat in brow, what am I going to do? Woe is me. And I think about within the first week that I was there, I actually got a call from the HR manager that I was very close with when I worked with the government the first time, to say she's in a bind. They've advertised for these positions for a project manager for this program, and they've not had anybody to fill it. Am I willing to take it? And I'm like, I just left the project manager's post. That's not my interest in architecture. But I took the post, and I stayed in it for a while. Whilst in the post, I got back into teaching part-time, which was great. So my interest and my love continued around those things. And, it got to a point where the program had kind of hit, like because I was the one who's a project manager, we could forecast things and we could see where things were. And what was meant to be a 2-year program, we realized that they, a lot of the equipment that they had planned for still wasn't being, was not in a position that it was actually going to be held. A lot of the legislation around them still hadn't been actually passed. And I had to have an adult discussion with them, and I said, look, I know you have me for 2 years, but I've been here for 6 months, and I've seen a decline in the things that I can actually do. And I said, I don't want to waste the government's money. And so they wanted me to stay, and I said, I don't think I can. I said, not in good conscience. And so I stepped down out of the position, and so that program, as a result, was put on pause, and probably for a good thing, because I think by the next financial year, they had actually closed that program indefinitely. And I think there was a little bit of respect, the fact that I was able to do it, and as I said, I wanted to go where, one, I was needed and I could make an impact. And so was, back in a position that I was quite familiar with. I was teaching part-time. I reached out to a former employer that I was working with part-time, Cornerstone Architects, with Chris Winstone, and I was working there kind of in between things, and kind of just, again, finding my foothold. About a year of doing part-time teaching, and I was now teaching the undergraduate class. In the second year, I was invited by the head of school at that time to take on a full-time position, which I accepted. But I think this time around, I didn't give up the part-time position. I just kind of had conversation and said, hey, I'm going into this full-time position. Can I still work here? I know that my hours are going to be limited, but I still want to work here. I want to definitely go towards my, my professional hours so that I can actually become registered. And they were more than happy for it. That whole registration period took longer for me, aside from being away for so long, but now coming back and working part-time versus other people who are doing it on a full-time basis.
Do you mind quickly telling the people what's required to become registered as an architect in Jamaica?
Sure. So to be registered as an architect, you are required first to have a professional degree in architecture that is recognized. So that the body of recognition is the Commonwealth Association of Architects, that they accredit a number of schools globally. They also do sort of co-recognition with other similar bodies, whether it becomes the National Architectural Accreditation Board in the US. There is a similar body in the UK called RIBA, which is the Royal Institute of British Architects. But the Commonwealth Association of Architects is kind of the largest body, of which the Caribbean School of Architecture is the only body in the Caribbean that is recognized by them. So in the first instance, one has to have that professional degree, which in my case is a Master's of Architecture. You are then required to have professional experience of at least 2 years with a registered architect. You are permitted to have at least one of those years must be in Jamaica with a registered architect license to practice. And once you've completed those things, you actually log, it's called a logbook, and you have to log all of your time doing it. And there's a variety of experiences that you're supposed to have and a certain criteria, a number of hours within each thing. Once that's approved, you are to prepare a case study. The case study is on a completed project or a near to completed project where you're able to make an analysis of the complete life cycle of that building, from the early initial stages with meeting with the clients all the way to the completion of the finished product. On the successful completion of the case study, you then sit a written exam, which is done over a 1-day period. And after that successful completion, you then do an oral exam, or what is sometimes referred to casually as an interview. The interview brings up everything that you would have done previously, that you would have passed previously, and there's a discussion and a kind of an oral interview around that one. If you are successful in your examinations, you can then formally apply to have your name added to the Register of Architects. I was successful in my registration in 2013. So yes, this year makes 11 years of being registered architect. I am number 192. The weird thing in all of this is that somewhere along the way they convinced me to also be the registrar of the Architects Registration Board. So that was also the other thing that I ended up doing when I returned, which is that becoming involved in the community of architects, that I ended up serving as a registrar, and it's been one of those humbling and learning experiences. I remember funny enough, the person that I was employed to on a part-time basis, Christopher Winstone, was one of those that recommended. He was the one that made the call and said, is this something that you'd be interested in? And I started to give an answer, and he said no. He's like, I've already recommended you for the position. I think you should take it. And he said, you know why? He says, he's like, because I know you'll do it to the best of your ability and you'll do it your way. And I remember going to the first meeting, and and this is sort of a transitionary one between the previous registrar and myself. And I said, I want to make sure that I'm going to be doing, not that I'm going to be doing things differently, but I'm going to still be approachable. And I said, if you have a problem with me being approachable, it's better that I don't take this position. I want us to be, we have to recognize that there's a customer service, there's to the value of work that we're doing, but also that we are, in that position, you're meant to be a steward of the architectural community, which means you need to be approachable, you need to be accessible, which was, I think, a very different lesson and a different approach that was previously taken. And I said, the difference is me in this position, you know, prior, you couldn't just pick up the phone and call the registrar. You couldn't just reach out. And I've always been that person. And I said I had to be that person in that role, for better or for worse. It means sometimes that at particular times of the year when people need to have their license certificate, I'm getting calls, morning, noon, and night. Yeah. But I understand, and I'm able to give people sincere, honest answers. And I'm not trying to. It's not a case of playing favorites or anything. It's about this. I think you're due. Yeah. To be that person. That if you've taken this position, you need to be approachable. You need to be. You need to be accessible within reason to be able to answer people's questions. And tell them answers that if they don't exist in other forums, to be able to give it to them.
Yes, most professional bodies need that. So let's be more like David and the Association of Architects. Okay, thanks, David. You shared so much with us. And so I think I want you to tell me now how you got to the point of opening Cutworks. Like what happened there?
So I was teaching for 10 years, 9 years full time. And I think and I had done a fair amount of things. I had spent some time as a program director. I had published a number of papers. I had seen persons that I taught as very young become registered. And I was finding that I was having that itch, that there was a lot of the things that I was teaching about that I wanted to see in practice in Jamaica. When I became registered, I was taking on, a few projects here or there, nothing of consequence. I think just things to kind of keep my foot in that sort of professional door. But the demands became, I think, more like people wanted my advice. And at first it was just a bit of consultancy, then a little bit need for a little bit more. And so I set up my practice while I was still teaching, not an intention that I was going to leave it, all alone, but I think it just, it kind of whispered in my ear, like, this is where you need to, you need to shift the attention, that you need to, practice more, teach less, that you can still be involved with the school, but, in a different avenue. And so, by 2017, I registered the business formally, and we started practicing, I started off with just one assistant and a couple of persons that I was doing things on a part-time basis. And, we've been just kind of trying to put out the work that we speak about, that we think is necessary to do. Things that are, I think, a bit of architecture for all, that are conscious of the environment, that are designed around our cultural things that define us as a Caribbean. I'm just trying to put out work like that at every step of the way. And it's not about style, it's not about image, it's about something that's a little bit more sincere, and reflective of who we are as West Indians.
I love that. What's your favorite project that you've worked on so far?
The architect's always going to say that the favorite project is the one that they're working on right now.
I thought you were going to do like parent and say they're all my favorite.
No, not at all. It's always about the one that you're working on. Okay. We've been, I think, we always wanted to be, we're nimble, so we work on projects that are small, we work on projects that are larger. The larger the project, obviously we team up with other persons, whether as the lead or as that sort of, supporting partner. And we're very humble enough that we don't care, we just want to be involved in many cases. We have an opportunity, I think, to work on some very interesting projects. We have some pro bono projects that we've been working on. I'm working on the Eva May Wright Auditorium, which is an auditorium in St. Elizabeth it's for one of these schools that used to be an all-age school that is now, kind of multidisciplinary. And, we're working on that project, which was, just out of association and our kind of regular trips down to St. Elizabeth and to Treasure Beach, and we just kind of got involved. And so we are, designing that auditorium, which is meant to be this multi-purpose facility. We have a similar one that is being done for St. Catherine High School. It's so
my husband went there.
Well, they're gonna have a fantastic facility when it's done. We've also worked on a few, I think, really unique projects. I mean, and to talk about things, full circle and that sort of, slingshot effect. One of our closest, growing up, I spoke about our neighbors when we were in Ligony, and there was a job that was kind of recommended. When we had set up shop, my former neighbor, she had seen something on television about the Hyacinth Lightburn that they were looking to, they were trying to invest into these other things that they had on their property, and they wanted to build kind of a daycare for seniors. And they were having professional issues. They were needing, they needed help. And so, she picked up the phone and she called them and said, "Oh, I have an architect that would be perfect for you." And so I got this phone call that said, "Hey, you've been recommended by such and such." And we've been trotting along, getting this project done. And we said, look, at the time, we couldn't do it as a, so it's been like a non-for-profit project for us, where we've just like the expenses that we have are the only thing that we bill, and we really try and cover as much of it as possible, except for when we can't. And they're very, very close to actually completing and opening their facility.
Wow.
And it's, it's really just meant to be a very different kind of facility that doesn't exist in Jamaica. What do you, in the Caribbean, we don't put our parents and our grandparents in a old people's home unless you really have to. That's not really what you want. Ideally, you want them home, and it's like, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with it when they're at home and you have work, you have, your family has other things, and the facility is really about, understanding all of those things and being able to give back. That you can, in the mornings you can carry your parents or grandparents to this daycare facility where they have access to nurse care and health care, doctors and everything else like that, and get everything done. And then in the evening you can pick them up, but they also get an opportunity that they're able to be around other persons, to still have that sort of cognitive activity. And it's, while it's a small facility, the aim is that it's not going to be the only one of its kind. And it's a very, very unique facility. And the weirdest thing is that it's not the first one that I've done. I had an opportunity to do a similar one in Montserrat, and we were able to see the success that was. And that one also served as a bit of a community center as well. And it was understanding that could happen there that I was able to transition the lessons learned in Montserrat. Now in Jamaica in private practice.
Love that. Love transfer of knowledge. All right, so we're coming close to the end, and I just wanted to ask you to share with our viewers what your top 3 tips for repatriation are.
I think I never really felt like I was away. I think this recognition that I was always here in some way, shape, or form. I think no Jamaican really leaves. And so I think it's about understanding that there's a place. You have a place here. We call it like birthright, whatever that is. But I think that recognition that you still have a place here. I think the second one is, and within that first one is never really forget your roots. But in the second part is, realizing with a bit of humility that what you have is not, while you were away, is nothing better than what is in Jamaica. You're not better than anyone else when you return. all you're looking at doing is that you're taking, you're taking a grain and a pinch of salt that was somewhere else, and you're bringing it into Jamaica to find out, is it that they need a pinch of salt? Is it a pinch of salt here, a pinch of salt there? It's about a transfer of knowledge and experience to someone else so that they can do with it as they see fit. It's not meant to be a direct translation, because there's lots of things that I learned that don't really have an application in Jamaica, but my experience of it did, and I'm able to talk to people about, what it's like to travel to places like this. The things that I did while I was away, I recommended other persons do it, and they followed in that suit. And I think, those are, I think, absolutely invaluable things. It's not about, you got to take with a bit of humility that it's not about you. Your repatriation is less about you and more about the country.
So
about how the country can grow from your experiences and the things that you had. You are not necessarily an expert. You're just bringing a part of all of that. And it's, we oftentimes see when people think that they're an expert because they've had this other experience, and they think that their things are the only ways. Usually when things go wrong, Jamaica has a life of its own. There are things of it, and it's about learning and absorbing those things and filtering out the things that are not useful and absorbing the things that are. And I think in the third one is the third one would be that you're gonna break a few eggs. You're gonna have to suck salt. You may have to start over, and there's nothing wrong with that. I comment to people that I've had to financially rebuild my life a number of times, and it's possible, and you make it better each time you do.
Yeah. That's it. Woo! Those are some good tips. So with that, I have nothing else to say. I want to thank David again for your time. You can find him at Cutworks Ja. What do you want to share?
That's the easiest way to find us. Cutworks Ja on all the socials.
On all the socials. And thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, share. If there's someone from Montserrat watching, tell us your favorite place in Montserrat and the best place to get a drink. And if you're watching from Australia, tell us your favorite beer. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.